We're in the fourth turning. We got $36 trillion of debt. We got a spending problem. This issue is being forced upon us. And what are we going to do about it? Like, how are we going to navigate it? And it seems that Bitcoin, for whatever reason, is part of that plan.
Hey everybody, this episode of Supply Shock is powered by Core. You're going to hear a lot more about them later in this episode, but first, a word from our sponsors.
Core is the Bitcoin consumer chain. Stake your Bitcoin, explore Bitcoin DeFi, and earn rewards today. Visit stake.coredao.org/blockworks. You'll hear more about them later in the episode.
Hey everybody, Pete Rizzo, the Bitcoin historian here, broadcasting live at the Digital Asset Summit in New York. On today's episode of Supply Shock, we're bringing on someone with a long history in Bitcoin, longer than me. Trace Mayer first recommended Bitcoin all the way back in 2011 when it was trading at 25 cents. He's been with us through many a bull run, where he's been a supporter and advocate for liberty, freedom, and Bitcoin. Of course, the long-standing Bitcoin Knowledge podcast, which you can still find interviews, and now the founder of Capital. Trace, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks so much, Pete. Good to see you again.
Yeah, so Trace, Bitcoin obviously changed from the early days when you were a pioneering podcaster to today. It's common for us to see our old friends in the White House. What's it like for you to watch what's going on with the strategic Bitcoin reserve and the U.S. government and Donald Trump, an elected U.S. politician, advocating for Bitcoin?
Yeah, I think this is incredibly exciting, part of just the history of humanity. I started my first blog was Run to Gold. That was January 2008. And so that's where I talked about monetary science, like, monetary sovereignty, a lot of these issues. And also the outlet that I used to distribute some of the initial evangelism of Bitcoin. I targeted the libertarians and the gold bugs. The libertarians they're just the crazy ones. And then the gold bugs, they should understand the sound money. And so now that we're actually seeing the actualization of Bitcoin into this world reserve settlement currency good, it's really fulfilling its destiny. The U.S. is, with President Trump, the U.S. is acting like a superpower, which, it hasn't necessarily acted like the last couple decades, but now it's really, he's bringing back this kind of nationalism. It could morph into protectionism with the tariffs, like all these things. But, if you have the freedom and the dignity of the individual that we protect under the Bill of Rights and stuff like that, then we can have that economic prosperity. And I think that's one of the reasons that the U.S., you look at the U.S. GDP versus European GDP over the last 20 years, and the U.S. is they were roughly equal, and now U.S. is twice Europe's. And so, sound money is only going to help supercharge that type of policy of America first. And really, it's any country that wants to be first. Like, you want your country to be first, like, follow the example. Have individual rights, have economic freedom, freedom of speech. A lot of these core things that made America great, like, they're being brought back to make America great again. And sound money is chief among all of those, in my opinion.
Well, I'm curious from your perspective. Obviously, you were an early evangelist with the libertarians, who are politically averse, right? Maybe not people who are engaging with the political process. How do you feel now kind of watching kind of the Bitcoin community become so involved in politics and having used politics probably effectively to achieve the goals of the movement? Is that something that you expected? Do you feel conflicted about that? Or obviously there's risks, right? Now Bitcoin is partisan to many people.
2008, like, I went door to door for Ron Paul. So, like, I'm a libertarian. So for me, there hasn't really been a change. I also look at things in a very pragmatic way. And so, what are we able to acquire, and what's the cost that we have to pay for that? If we want to acquire monetary sovereignty, for example, like, how do we do that? How do we move that boundary a little bit? And we've actually moved it a lot of it with Bitcoin. What do I mean by that? We have digital scarcity now, 21 million. Like, that has fundamentally changed the planet by being able to get the tech out there. And then, because the cypherpunks, they write the code, they put the tech out there, but it's the political will that will keep the tech out there. And so, being able to engage in the political process, like, that's just part of the human condition, and we shouldn't expect everybody to agree with us. And then, when we're in an environment like we are today, when we're in a fourth turning, we had the Constitutional Revolution, we had the Civil War, we had World War II, now we have what we're in, and we're going through this great gate in history, and Trump's leading us through it. The seeds of this fourth turning, they got sown in the previous fourth turnings. So we're looking at World War II, we're looking at Bretton Woods, we're looking at the IMF, we're
This
looking
is the
at
undoing of that global order.
that all those things are changing. And the previous one, the Civil War, I mean, you had Samuel Chase as the Treasury Secretary issuing greenbacks, and Lincoln puts him on the Supreme Court the next year, and on the Supreme Court he votes the greenbacks unconstitutional. So you look at like the centralization of the federal banking system under Lincoln. You look at, a few years before that, you had Andrew Jackson, and he's going up against this second bank of the United States, and he calls them a den of vipers, and they try to assassinate him. The revolvers get stuffed into his abdomen, the triggers get pulled, they misfire, so protected by divine providence, just like Trump in his ear. It's just wild, like the stories, right? But the Civil War, what was the previous fourth turning to that? It was the Constitutional Revolution. And what was one of the critical issues? It was the continental dollar and creditors, debtors paying the creditors without mercy with this worthless paper, and enshrining sound money into the Constitution, gold and silver, Article 1, Section 10, Clause 1. And so, there was a founding father, and he made a comment that through a long chain of cause and effect, God punishes nations for their national sins. And so, when we don't resolve an issue like slavery,
right,
in that fourth turning, it bubbles under the surface until it explodes in the next fourth turning, like with the Civil War. And so, we're just, humanity's just going
living
through
out
their
our
cycles.
past monetary sins.
Well, what Franklin Roosevelt made gold illegal in 1933. The legislature did this, like piled on. Ron Paul got it re-legalized, but we had Nixon closing the gold window in 1971, defaulting on the gold delivery to Charles de Gaulle in the 1960s. Ron Paul gets it re-legalized in 1974, and we have several gold clause cases in between that time, but that really caused like this demonetization of gold. But then we also had City versus Dover, which squarely framed the issue of what is a dollar, and kind of the sound money issue. And the U.S. Supreme Court refused to hear the case, largely because it's a political question. So we have all three branches of government abdicating their duty under the U.S. Constitution to enforce a sound money system because it's a political question, because we've gone down this road for so long. Right? And now here we are. We're in the fourth turning. We got $36 trillion of debt. We got a spending problem. We got like this issue is being forced upon us. And what are we going to do about it? Like, how are we going to navigate it? And, Trump and Treasury Secretary Bessent, like, they have a plan for it. And Secretary of Commerce Ledn, they have a plan for it. And it seems that Bitcoin, for whatever reason, is part of that plan.
HODLing isn't enough anymore. Bitcoin is evolving on core, unlocking yield, utility, and a thriving DeFi ecosystem. With over 250 dApps and nearly $1 billion in total value locked, Bitcoin DeFi is growing fast. Hundreds of thousands of users are already staking, lending, and building on Core's high-speed, low-fee rails. Now it's your turn. Whether you're a user or a builder, the Core Ignition program rewards you for participating in Bitcoin's next evolution. Unlock your Bitcoin and use Core. Start earning with Ignition today at ignition.coredao.org/blockworks. For the past decade, Ledger has been the global leader in digital asset security, trusted to secure more than 20% of the world's crypto assets. Celebrating 10 years of innovation, Ledger is making digital ownership more secure and accessible with their latest products, LedgerStacks, and LedgerFlex. These wallets feature the world's first secure touchscreens, simplifying your digital transactions while ensuring uncompromising security through Ledger's secure chip and proprietary OS. Plus, with the Ledger Security Key app, you can say goodbye to traditional passwords and step up your digital protection. Ready to protect your assets? Choose the most trusted name in hardware wallets, Ledger, and take control of your digital security today at ledger.com. Unlock the power of your Bitcoin with Ledn. For over 6 years, Ledn has helped thousands HODL their Bitcoin while accessing liquidity, focusing on transparency, security, and trust. Learn what your Bitcoin can do for you and see why so many clients trust Ledn. Visit ledn.io to learn more.
Let's talk about that plan. Michael Saylor is going to be at Digital Asset Summit talking tomorrow. He's calling on the government to buy 5 million Bitcoin. He wants the U.S. government to own 25% of the supply of the Bitcoin network. Is that something that you align with? You see value in that plan? You want the U.S. government to own 5 million Bitcoin?
How are they going to buy them?
From the market, right?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Because when they make the announcement, everybody's just going to sell it to them, right?
Yeah.
Now, this is part of the issue of digital scarcity and just human nature. We get these, we see it so much in Bitcoin, just these wild runs up and these massive crashes down, and and part of that's because the monetary policy is fixed, right? So we don't get to modulate the effects of the human action with the supply and of the underlying current asset that we're using.
So you think the U.S. government couldn't even buy 5 million Bitcoin if it wanted to?
They would have a hard time. 5 million coins? I mean, how many coins got added into the ETFs and Michael Saylor in 2024?
I think we're at 1.3 million.
Yeah, and price moved 30K to about 80K in that process, up to 109K. Yeah. I mean, if the government wants to acquire it, the governments operate on totally different timescales than individuals do. Like individuals, we operate on days and years, right? Like days and weeks. Governments, they act on years and decades. So 5 million coins, acquire it over, a 10 or 15-year period. Senator Loomis's bill, something like that. I have a donor advised fund with Fidelity, and I can donate Bitcoin to it, and I get to write it off at the fair market value of the coin, regardless of what my basis is. So introduce something like, maybe you don't have to pay capital gains tax on Bitcoin or crypto gains if you pay your taxes with them. That might be a way to induce more supply to come out.
Through smart government programs.
Well, you could do things like that instead of just going into the market and smash buying a $5 million market order, right? I mean, what's the plan to buy 5 million of these coins or to acquire?
Well, I think under the Loomis bill, right, it is to revalue our gold holdings. Use some of those proceeds to start acquiring Bitcoin, a certain amount each year. But that would change the market structure, right? You'd have people taking advantage of that.
It would. Yeah, market structure would get changed tremendously. I mean, we already got 400,000 hodlers of last resort in the army. So, people are buying and acquiring every day and sticking them into this long-term holdings. But when we look at gold, I mean, what's the average duration of hodl of the gold UTXOs? I mean, you got families in India that probably have held the same gold down through the families for generations. I mean, I got a gold coin I bought 20 years ago, right? So that UTXO is 20 years old. So when we're talking about Bitcoin hodl waves, and we're talking about length of, we seem to think 155 days is a long-term holder, and it's well, how about 1,500 days?
What do you think about? So I think what's driving some of the strategic Bitcoin reserve stuff is this idea that America can benefit from Bitcoin, and potentially it'll be things like paying off the national debt, right? This is something that Michael Saylor and others are talking about. Do you think that Bitcoin could be used to pay off something like the national debt? Is that an attractive idea?
So this gets pretty complicated, right? And I think a good analogy is search engine optimization. If you type in, the first result gets 55% of the clicks.
Right.
for the search traffic. Like the second result gets, I don't know, 25% of the clicks. And I haven't been in the industry for a while, so I don't know all the percentages, but I think the principle holds true. And the third one gets like 10% of the clicks. And then all the other ones, even back to like page 1000, you know, they get the remaining like 5% of the clicks. So if you're a superpower, like the U.S. is, and if you have the world reserve currency, like the U.S. does, why would you want to get rid of the world reserve currency status any sooner than you have to?
Right. Yeah.
Like, you should drag that out as long as you can to have that seniorage where you're basically able to like tax sovereign countries without any representation from them. I mean, that's a tremendous like power to have.
We're the only country in the world that has it. Right?
And the U.S. has it, right? So like, what's the number one click? Like, what's the number one search result? What's the number two search result? Well, gold is very much the center of the financial system. You know, orders of magnitude larger market cap than Bitcoin. The daily emission, several multiples. You know, multiple. I mean, it's probably like, it could be 10x.
Are you saying it's too early for Bitcoin to be a geopolitical asset?
Oh, it's already a geopolitical asset, but what's the size or the scale of it? And why would it be in the interest of the U.S. to accelerate that any faster than it needs to? Because then it might be paying a cost that's higher than what it otherwise needs to pay. And so, you know, when we're looking at those clicks for world reserve settlement asset, like, we have gold, we have dollars, and then what do we have next? We might have like yuan or euros, but we have Bitcoin. Like, Bitcoin's probably in the top 5.
Currency,
oh no,
yeah.
Well, I mean, it's probably in the top 5 as like a geopolitical treasury reserve asset. That, as an equity-based one, I mean, there's gold and Bitcoin. Like, I mean, you can sort of put oil in there, but oil doesn't really carry this large monetary premium on it or anything, right?
It's got to be burned.
Yeah, I mean, you're using it, you're burning it, you have to store it. The cost to store is so much higher. You're even real estate. You're not. Yes, there's some monetary premium attached to this stuff, but like, it's not a reserve settlement asset like Bitcoin is. Bitcoin's just such pristine collateral, and so like, in this process, if you're the world's superpower, well, keep the world reserve settlement currency, drain all the other nations of their physical bullion, and the thing that could potentially challenge gold, like, dominate that too. So have it integrated into your financial system, have it seeded onto the balance sheets of your companies, have your individual citizens owning and holding it, like, have policy that's like encouraging the financial innovation, and that way you dominate all 3 of the top search results. You get, and then, you know, extend your dollar with the stablecoins to infringe on the other superpowers like monetary sovereignty. And that's what we've seen. Like, the EU bureaucrats are like, oh, we don't like these stablecoins. They're infringing on EU monetary sovereignty. And it's like, well, you know, when we have freedom and we have choices, like, you have to be a lot more competitive. So EU, maybe you need to be more competitive. Maybe you need more freedom of speech. Maybe you need better regulation. Maybe you need these ideas that have made America such a superpower. And if you don't have those ideas, maybe you just get to be poor. Because that's what happens when you don't have like fundamentally sound rules, rule of law in your society, because that interferes with human action and the ability to allocate resources in this kind of profitable way. You know, that's the true cost of like bureaucracy and socialism, is that you just destroy a bunch of capital because you have no ability to perform economic calculation, which those who are living in a free society, they're able to do that because of the profit and loss system. So if you're allocating resources and capital in a society not through profit and loss, but through some other system like EU bureaucracy, you're going to destroy a bunch of wealth, and then you're going to be poor. And then guess what? You're not going to have weapons and tanks and stuff to deal with someone who wants to like take some of your territory.
Let's zoom out a little bit. Obviously, that was pretty zoomed out. But we were talking a little bit backstage about this idea that there is economic warfare right now between the superpowers.
Always has been.
Between the U.S. and China particularly. And that the new administration really does, I think, see stablecoins as an opportunity. And maybe this opportunity conflicts with maybe the freedom values that we have as Bitcoiners. How do you see the U.S. stablecoin play, and how do you see the U.S. dynamic with China, in that context?
I mean, China's the big threat. I mean, Russia like runs around starting brush fires here and there, but like China's the big threat. And
from like a human liberty standpoint.
yeah, human liberty, size, hundreds of millions of people. Like Russia's already in demographic decline. This is probably their last hurrah. They already were severely weakened in World War II. 20 million Russians to like soften up the Germans so that the Americans could finish them off. We only lost 400,000 in World War II, the U.S. 50 Russians died for every American that died, like fighting that Axis power. So, Russia's just kind of hobbled in terms of this like demographic decline, and this is pretty much their last hurrah of being able to do anything in Ukraine, and it seems to be coming to a close. But China, like Mao had, it was a gift to the state to have a bunch of kids, and so they, every woman should have 10 children, and so they just had this population explosion, and now they have to figure out what to do with them all because they're no longer the cheap labor source. You got Vietnam, you got Indonesia. They have to retool their society, but they're very, Xi Jinping is very much operating on, this kind of communist mindset, which means that there's destruction of capital and wealth, and there's only one way to change the political system in China, and it's very bloody. And so, being able to keep the domestic population subjugated and under control. I mean, we're seeing it right with the social credit scores and the QR codes in the cities and you don't get
surveillance cameras.
Oh yeah, they are cracking down big time on freedom of movement and freedom of the press. Always has been cracked down on. Economic liberty, social credit score. I mean, all this stuff is very much cracking. So you have to wonder what's the true kind of economic and therefore potential military strength that could come out of China, and then what do they want to do? And they're got this barge to invade Taiwan. So are we going to kind of retreat from Taiwan, just like U.S. retreated from Afghanistan, and just like it's kind of retreating from Ukraine? And what's the return on investment for the U.S. if it does get involved with Taiwan? Why do we care about Taiwan? I mean, maybe it's like AI supercomputer chips or whatever, but they already built a factory in Arizona, and they turned out like the most complicated Apple chip out of the superconductor factory. So, if we're reshoring a lot of our productive capacity, especially in the high-tech, high-field areas, why would we want to spend blood and treasure to save Taiwan? What's the real ROI on that? And so I think this is part of all the calculus, right? China's in this demographic decline, but that just incentivizes them to mobilize for war. And the Chinese embassy responded oh, if they want tariff wars and all, well, we can have real wars too. And it's why do we need to have a real war with China? China is already kind of in this decline. So, and it's much more about the U.S. needs to be expanding its ideological underpinnings. China's made such inroads in Argentina, Africa, Brazil.
But using the yuan to export that financial power.
Yeah, they're exporting the financial power, but really, and why are they doing it? Because they've desertification all of their farmland. They got hundreds of millions of people, and they don't know how to feed them. And so they got to go to South America and lock up agriculture assets basically in order to make sure that they get fed. So I mean, China doesn't want a war. You just blockade them and don't let food get in there, and they're gonna have a big problem real fast.
But I guess maybe it's true that the United States sees stablecoins as a way to increase its power in the world.
Yeah. So the stablecoin, you start issuing out this U.S. dollar stablecoin, and all of a sudden you're opening up the dollar to use cases that
new markets,
new markets, new people
new
using
treasury
it.
demand.
Yeah, it's being used in Africa. It's being used in South America. People are sending it peer to peer. This all
But a lot of
helps extend the
Bitcoiners are really
dollar.
concerned about this, right? They see what's happening in the U.S. and they think, oh, this is not CBDCs, But the private-public sector partnership that's going to create this next wave of stablecoins maybe has some human rights, privacy negatives that we don't want to see.
Okay, so, and that's a valid concern, and I feel for it. And I'd very much like to see like solutions built in this area, and Bitcoiners, we've had tremendous financial gains as a result of Bitcoin. So what are we building as a solution to this? I mean, my grandma had a saying, you can want in one hand and you can spit in the other and see which one fills up first. So like you can whine and cry and everything about like CBDCs coming down the pipeline or currency transaction reports on $200 limits versus $10,000 limits. I mean, talk about a massive batch of financial surveillance. But okay, whine and cry about it, but what are you going to do about it? Are you going to build something? Because Bitcoiners don't really have an excuse now. Like, you have the financial resources. If you want to see the world be a different place, get to work and build the solution. Like, that's how you make the world a different place. You don't make the world a different place by like sitting behind your keyboard and tweeting about stuff and like not actualizing something into existence.
The only thing better than stacking sats is staking them. With Core's self-custodial Bitcoin staking, you can earn yield on your BTC without ever giving up custody, no new trust assumptions, no counterparties, and no slashing risk. Still your keys, still your coins, now your yield. Here's how it works. Lock your Bitcoin on the Bitcoin network. Help elect a Core validator and start earning Core rewards, passively, securely, and without risk to your principal. And with dual staking, you can boost rewards by staking Core tokens alongside your Bitcoin. Institutions can also tap into Bitcoin at scale with top custodians. Don't let your Bitcoin sit idle, put it to work. Visit stake.core.dao/blockworks to start staking today. For the past decade, Ledger has been the global leader in digital asset security, trusted to secure more than 20% of the world's crypto assets. Celebrating 10 years of innovation, Ledger is making digital ownership more secure and accessible with their latest products, Ledger Stacks and Ledger Flex. These wallets feature the world's first secure touchscreens, simplifying your digital transactions while ensuring uncompromising security through Ledger's secure chip and proprietary OS. Plus, with the Ledger Security Key app, you can say goodbye to traditional passwords and step up your digital protection. Ready to protect your assets? Choose the most trusted name in hardware wallets, Ledger, and take control of your digital security today at ledger.com. If you've been around Bitcoin for long enough, you've heard the term HODL and the name Ledn. Ledn has been the go-to specialist in Bitcoin lending for over 6 years. Ledn helps you unlock the liquidity of your BTC, allowing you to HODL while still accessing the wealth of your Bitcoin. Ledn has been battle-tested with a focus on transparency, security, and trust. This has allowed them to build a proven track record of client success and security, helping tens of thousands of clients harness the value of their digital assets with confidence and peace of mind. Learn for yourself why so many clients trust Ledn by checking out Ledn's Trustpilot or their reviews on social media. And to learn more about what your Bitcoin can do for you, check out ledn.io.
Well, let's talk about a little bit because the Bitcoin community has become a bit more passive technologically, maybe a bit more kind of aligned with using the politics to achieve its gains. Like, how do you look at like the technology movement in Bitcoin and its capabilities? Obviously, Lightning is working now. There was the fork wars in which we kind of fought to kind of build this technology, but additional layers on Bitcoin, maybe aren't getting the attention that they used to. Additional Bitcoin upgrades. Do you think that ossification process is a negative for Bitcoin?
Like ossification of the base layer, or ossification of the base layer
of
just, or this like slowing down of monetary innovation and
I think
pushing
there's a
forward the
relationship
envelope.
between both of those things, right? As we saw with Lightning, there needed to be upgrades in order for Lightning to actually be
we
active.
got like Taproot and Atari out there, and there's lots of, I think these are a lot. One of the reasons a lot of these solutions haven't been built yet is because they're hard problems to solve. It takes a lot of thinking, and even if you think and you come up with a good solution, like, it doesn't mean it's going to get any market adoption. Because how much do people really value monetary sovereignty? That's a question that's out there. And
I think like bring it back to the conversation about like the global landscape, right? There's I think a wing of the Bitcoin community, maybe this is prevalent in like your Jack Dorsey's, your kind of Africa Bitcoin conference, that want to see Bitcoin become a peer-to-peer medium of exchange in the developing world. And they see stablecoins as a new battlefront in this competition where the U.S. government on one hand is stockpiling Bitcoin, but on the other hand has a direct interest in increasing the demand for its debt through stablecoins.
If you're the superpower, you want all three of the search results.
You're just on the evil genius plan, right?
Well, no, I mean, it's like when you're talking about statecraft, like, I mean, it's statecraft can get really messy. When we look at this fourth turning and where we're at, kind of relative in the timeline to where we were in, 1938, 1939, before the real hostilities broke out. So are we going to be navigating this fourth turning in a larger scale, bloody mess? And you look at the Constitutional Revolution, the Civil War was a whole lot bigger. World War II was a whole lot bigger than that. The trend in this case is not your friend, because each of these four turnings have gotten increasingly larger in scale, and the nature of war has changed. In World War I, everybody thought they were going to be fighting like on cavalry, and instead it was in trenches with machine guns and biological weapons like mustard gas. So, the whole nature of war changes and evolves and gets applied differently in these four turnings. How are we seeing these like types of warfare playing out in this fourth turning? Well, we've got biological weapons being developed with gain of function and released on domestic populations globally. We have drones that are like changing the nature of warfare in Ukraine. Who knows what types of wonder weapons we have? I mean, Russia like rained down that, I forget even the name of it, but I mean, it was like just a catastrophic type weapon.
I guess how does the Bitcoin community become more active within, if this is the context in which we are building on Bitcoin? How do we become more active? Because it sounded like you were a bit frustrated maybe with not seeing, there being more built.
It's up to everybody. Like what? It's not frustration. The point is, like, if you have the resources now, why are you whining about something instead of making the solution? If you don't like this stable coin issue or whatever, like, are you building an alternative?
Well, isn't that
are you building a solution?
Isn't Bitcoin the alternative?
Well, I think it can be an alternative. I mean, we're going from this largely like centralized, almost socialized unit of exchange, the dollar, where our latest innovation was like the debit card or something.
Right.
Yeah,
the ATM, maybe.
Because of financial repression and, it's just been so hard to innovate in this space, to now the Trump administration having a Cambrian explosion of kind of Wild West, where he launches his own token
right,
like the day before he gets inaugurated, and people complain about that. And it's like, why would you we want the more options we have, the better. Like we just got out of having one option.
So do you think the Trump coin is better than the dollar?
I think an environment where you can have 32 million altcoins is better than an environment where you can only have one government issued and transferable like asset, where like the Satoshi Action Fund, one of the kind of planks of legislation they have is getting rid of the money transmission laws by, if you're trading altcoins back and forth, you trade Dogecoin for Litecoin, you don't fall under money transmission license laws. I think that's a great thing, because money transmission license laws are like terrible, and then they rope you, the state ones rope you into the FinCEN like requirements and everything, and now you're having to do all this AML and KYC and blah 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 blah, and that just is such a financial repression that it's hard to innovate anything, right? And so that's the argument, is like, I think it's better to have 320 million altcoins than be stuck in a system where you can't innovate and there's severe amounts of repression that carry criminal penalties when you do try to do something.
Well, we're obviously at a crypto conference. There's a lot of people trying to innovate within.
Oh yeah, we got a Ripple sign over there.
We got Ripple signs over here. You've been in the space for a long time, same as myself. How do you view the cryptocurrency ecosystem beyond Bitcoin now? Has that changed? Do you think it is aspiring to anything larger at this point? Do you think that there is anything going on there that interests you?
Yeah, but going from a Shiba Inu to like a Great Dane. I don't know. Like it's.
But you've been
I mean,
you've been interested in other alternative cryptocurrencies before. There was
I mean,
interested in privacy
there's all
coins and things
types
like that,
of.
right?
I mean, we've all like I mean, I invested in gold money like in 2008, and we had 5 patents. James Turk had 5 patents in the mid 90s for creating a digital gold currency. So there was gold in the vault, and then we created like and it was held in trust through like a Jersey structure, and then the database could create a gold ounce, and then that could get sent around as like a payment. So we had like this, this innovation of trying to bring sound money into the into the internet age, into the information age with like a digital gold currency, and like, but then Bitcoin comes out, and we're able to transfer value over a communications channel, whether it's a radio or a fiber optic line, being able to turn digital scarcity and have this like solving this like Byzantine generals problem. Like this is like we've made a like that's an entire step function gain in terms of our ability to evolve monetarily as a species. And so like we need to like one of the analogies I use is Columbus discovered the trade winds to America. If we're going to map on sound money, like London is kind of like gold, New York is like Bitcoin, but then we have a whole continent. Maybe Chicago's like Ethereum, and the wild west is like St. Louis is like Monero, and then we have all these little tiny towns and villages that are like made up of 12 people. Maybe that's like one of these 32 million altcoins that just gets like created super easy on Solana or whatever, right? But the point is that we have a new continent to explore. We don't necessarily know what the map looks like. We get to create new technology. Like we have no idea if there's a San Francisco on the map. We have no idea if there's like, we don't know how big the continent is. We don't know where it is, because just like Columbus discovered the trade winds, Satoshi discovered this like consensus mechanism for solving the Byzantine generals problem. And so now we're over here, and of course, like my 10th great grandfather came over on the Mayflower, in 1620. In 1860, more or less, there were 800 people in San Francisco. New York had been doing the New York thing for almost 250 years. Like we had tons of people living there, tons of economic activity. All the economic building out the continent was flowing back through New York. We'd gone through the revolution, so we had now had rule of law, like in independence, but San Francisco was 800 people.
So it sounds like you do see that even though maybe nothing yet has come from the crypto ecosystem that you're particularly enthusiastic about, something you don't disallow that something could be created out of the attempt.
Yeah, I mean, I was in Bogota, one of our Bitcoin events there, and I went to dinner. We had Nick Szabo, Adam Back, and Peter Todd, and myself. So the 4 of us are sitting there, and we're just
quite a table.
Yeah, we're just shooting the bull, right? And we're kind of talking about this monetary history, because Adam Back's played a big role, like proof of work and DigiCash, and Nick Szabo, and kind of this idea of monetary evolution and the history behind all of that, and Peter Todd and the game theory. And Peter was kind of making this point about like we just have the thing, and Nick is like, no, this is like an iterative evolutionary process. And there's a graphic that kind of shows all of the stepping stones that had to be discovered to get Bitcoin. Like asymmetric encryption,
30
public private
years
key.
of crypto
It's like 40 years of history, of discoveries, of scientific discoveries and innovations. Like, if you've read software, like, I'm a 4th generation pilot. Why, when they came out with the airplane, when the Wright brothers came out with the airplane, why didn't they build it out of carbon fiber? Obviously, carbon fiber is superior to aluminum, and it's superior to cloth. So why didn't the Wright brothers build their airplane out of carbon fiber? Like, they're just stupid. No, like, there's an entire evolution that has to take place in order to, improve on your condition. We see it in every form of our technology. I mean, gunpowder like got discovered, and it took them a while to figure out that they could actually use it for war and then for cannons and all that type of stuff.
I've had the privilege of kind of getting a lot of emails from old-time Bitcoiners, maybe like yourself, from the 2009-11 era. We're trying to stay private. They're trying to figure out what to do with their, immense gains. And I think one impression that I get from them is this idea that they really can't believe how much wealth they've accrued.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy
for what they did. In one case, yeah.
But what we did was serious work. Greg Maxwell, for example, put money into a client trust account because he didn't know whether he was going to get swooped in on. Lawyer trust account would get swooped in on and prosecuted for writing the software. Like when Roger Ver, I was talking to him and like, I'll invest in BitPay. I wanted to invest in BitPay with him, and so we were in the seed round, and I think Founders Fund, Peter Thiel invested too. But we didn't know how that would play out, because are they money transmission business, or do they fall under the payment processing exemption? Well, anyone who owns all or part of a money transmission business, so you could own one share as a totally passive investor, could face 5 years in jail. So like the early Bitcoiners who worked on the code and also funded the companies, like, in a lot of ways, they stormed like Omaha Beach.
They took the risk.
They took the risk running into the machine gun fire, right? Because there are a lot of, you look at how they dealt with the Liberty Dollar guy.
And Charlie Shrem,
they look
even,
at,
Ross
Charlie
Ulbricht,
Shrem was like, you could argue that his was kind of a knowing and willful bad action, with BTC King. And I was actually in the courtroom when he pled guilty. I was like in the federal courtroom watching it. And I was in the Silk Road courtroom for the 3-week trial. I was watching the whole thing. And so, so the early Bitcoiners, they took risks, and some of them took more risks than others. If you're storming the beach and running into the machine gun fire, like do you want to not wear any protection or shield or?
Well, I think my second question was, I think it's hard for them to see that there will be more appreciation in the Bitcoin network. So I got this interesting email from one guy who he called himself half billion on Reddit. He had 10 to 15,000 coins, and he's looking to divest away from Bitcoin, right? Because in his mind, he doesn't see, he doesn't understand, I think, how he could possibly accrue more value, right? To be a multi-billionaire, to be a trillionaire, from maybe just being a small participant in a Reddit forum kind of online early on. How do you think about the continued appreciation of Bitcoin from your vantage point, where you've seen it appreciate from 25 cents to $80,000 a coin?
During this time frame, gold has been the asset with the highest stock to flow ratio, right? And Bitcoin started much lower. Now Bitcoin's got a higher stock to flow ratio. So at least the way I look at it is like, who owns and controls and holds the UTXOs of the hardest money on the planet? With gold, it might have been central banks, or maybe it's these old money families like Rothschilds or whatever, right? Like, we don't know exactly who holds all that gold, but they held those UTXOs, and that was the hardest asset on the planet. And what's the golden rule? He who has the gold makes the rules. Like, it's a pretty simple one, right? And now we have a new asset that has with a substantial amount of volume and liquidity and adoption. And Ethereum's not even close to, Bitcoin in terms of the depth and the liquid depth and all the things, right? So Bitcoin's very unique in this regard, as in our digital currency space. But it's now got pure proof of work and the highest stock to flow of any of the liquid assets on the planet. So, like, if you're a gold duke or a gold prince or a gold king, like dolphins, whales, whatever the other thing is. If you're now in that position with the new hardest money on the planet, like, why would you want to give up your seat?
I think they have a trouble imagining Bitcoin at $1 million or $10 million a coin. Like, how do you feel about that when you think about, Michael Saylor's, $450 million per coin? You had the option to buy some of these coins at 25 cents.
Yeah.
That means,
I think,
for $1 you could buy 200 million.
I think you might be missing the point. The point is, gold has been around as a form of currency on the planet for at least 2,500 years when the Lydians started coining it, and probably even before then. Like, how many empires have risen and fallen in that time? And how many governments and how many nation states? Like, we're talking about what's your share of the hardest asset on the planet, and who holds those UTXOs? And then, by extension, what's the philosophical or the moral character of the holders of that hardest asset? And so, one of the reasons I went after the gold bugs and the libertarians is, it'd be way better to have libertarians holding all the gold than, the people who are wrecking all this trouble with war, because he who has the gold makes the rules, right? Like, so, who now, if we got this 500 million person on Reddit, like, figure out a way to begin monetizing your Bitcoin without having to sell any. Maybe your overnight repos, or maybe you're selling some covered calls, or, there's ways to, like, in a very prudent manner, be able to monetize some of that. And then now you've got income streams. And like Michael Saylor's talking about, it's a nuclear reactor. You get an infinite amount of vol every day. Like, every day you get more vol, it's infinitely renewable. And every day you get more theta. So that becomes an infinitely renewable resource that you can monetize, and you can take that income stream and you can begin to have very positive effects in the world. If you're willing to do more than, like, just sit on your butt and, like, tweet, I mean, like, you have to actually build stuff, or you could have a 501c3 for health freedom or religious freedom or monetary sovereignty, or you could be funding, like, Bitcoin core development. You could be doing it off of earnings from the corpus, and maybe you do it only with 10% of the earnings off the corpus, and you buy more Bitcoin with the other 90%. And, you're just there. I think there's a lot that we can do, and, like, we've kind of won in some ways. We've won a small battle. We've gotten onto the beach. We've taken digital scarcity, but the real battle and the rest of the war, like, we still need to play it out. And we know where it's going to go. It's going to go towards, this sound money and this change in the economics of violence on the planet. But that's going to play out over years and decades, length of governments, right?
Sounds like you're saying that Bitcoiners, especially the old guard, they have a responsibility now that they have accrued wealth in Bitcoin.
If the responsibility is there, it would be a moral responsibility. So it's kind of like, in law school, we'd have these hypotheticals. If you're walking down the pier and you see someone drowning in the water, do you have a responsibility to, like, save them? And no, you don't. You might have a moral responsibility to save them, but you don't have, like, a legal responsibility to save them. So, but, like, what do we find? Our love is our life itself. What we really desire, that's going to inform our thinking and consequently our actions. The love, the desire that we have is going to impel an action, but the thought or the wisdom is going to give that action its quality. And so when you have a lot more of these resources, you have a lot more of an ability to cause actions to happen. And then if you bring the wisdom to the actions, like, you can now be so much more of a positive effect on the world or negative effect on the world. Money in a lot of ways is a very neutral asset. Like, it just gives you power to do something. And so, maybe that's part of the question for some of these people that have accrued a significant amount of wealth because, they stormed the beach. For whatever reason, they were part of the first guard. Like my grandpa, 1941, he was drafted for the duration of the war plus 6 months. So he didn't get to come home.
I think maybe their question is, what's left to achieve, right? What is this war? If this has been the D-Day of the war, what's the war?
Well, the digital scarcity, monetary sovereignty is part of the war, but we've got a whole bunch of stuff around that. Right to mine, right to run a full node, right to, in Wyoming, one of the laws that got passed a couple of years ago came out of my catalyst. You shall not be able to compel the disclosure of a private key in any judicial, criminal, civil, or administrative action. So, that's law in Wyoming and in Utah, by the way, because Utah, copied it and ported it over. But that's law now. So, if we like our private keys, why aren't we building defensive bulwarks around all of this stuff with legal code? We've built it with technological code, both software and hardware, with hardware wallets and hierarchical deterministic keys that, we innovated at Armory, and we innovated cold storage at Armory so that we could have these technological abilities to protect our private keys. And then it's okay, we got that. Now I want legal protections around the private keys.
Do you think the legal political sphere, this is the next battleground for Bitcoin for you?
Well, it's not about Bitcoin is merely one of the tools that we're able to use in the battleground of liberty and freedom and, these other kind of libertarian ideals. The very best of the political thought that came out of Europe, like John Locke and individual rights and all of these things, that really has allowed America to be this flame of freedom in the long history of darkness on this planet. If we want to continue that tradition onward, and we have resources to do it, who else is going to do it, right? Yeah. If you're in Europe right now, in France or in the UK, my grandpa's not coming to save you like he did last time. You're going to have to save yourself. And so, and there's nowhere to really run, I understand Roger Ver's sentiment, renouncing U.S. citizenship and running away somewhere. I understand the sentiment, but there's not really anywhere to run on the planet. And so if you're thinking long term, if you're thinking what type of a world are we going to be leaving to children or grandchildren or great-grandchildren? Are we going to be leaving a very monetarily repressed world where we have digital ID and social credit scores and central bank digital currencies and this kind of digital tyranny? Or are we going to be leaving a world that's got much more freedom and respect for the individual? And, we, in a lot of ways, we've been able to free ride off of the sacrifice other people have made. My fifth great-grandfather who was in Washington's army. My grandfathers who stormed the beaches at Normandy and were Battle of the Bulge. We get to free ride off of their sacrifices and the people who didn't come back. But now it's our generation's turn to go through a fork turning. And some of us are kids in middle school and high school, and others of us are baby boomers and everything in between. And it's how are you going to get involved in the fight? If you've ever watched the Patton movie from 1970,
I have, yeah.
He's given the speech, and he's to rally the troops to go into battle. And he's when you're telling your grandkids about the story, do you want to be in the middle of the fight, or do we want to be shoveling horse manure in Louisiana?
Yeah.
So if you've got if you got $500 million like this guy, and you're able to maybe you take 10% of that and you figure out how to lend it in an overnight repo to someone with a good counterparty that you like the counterparty risk. Now that's $50 million. Maybe you're able to make.
So it sounds like your message is get in the fight.
Well, hey, if you're going through this midlife crisis, existential crisis, trying to figure out what you're doing with your life, why you're on this planet, what purpose are you trying to accomplish, because our love is our life itself. If you're not finding that fulfillment and that joy and that happiness in your life, you really have to look inside and you have to work on that relationship with yourself and figure out what do you really desire, what do you really want to do and accomplish with your life, and that's you want to chase Mario coins, you just want to get more Bitcoins for the sake of that. Like we're in New York. There are a lot of people that they run on that hamster wheel their whole life and become very unfulfilled.
The fight ongoing at this conference. Trace, thanks for being here. Thanks for being on the podcast. Folks at home, this has been Supply Shock. This has been a Digital Asset Summit coming at you live. We'll be back in July with Permissionless, another conference where we're bringing the Bitcoin fight through the ages to the present. So thanks for sticking with us.
Thanks so much, Pete.